Okay, thank you for having me. My talk's broadened out somewhat from the abstract, very slightly, and it's important to say this is not, none of this research is a big funded project. It's more a reflection on day-to-day curatorial activity relating to this material. So National Museum of Scotland has a significant collection of archaeological maritime material from 4 wrecks of the early modern period found in Scottish waters. I'm going to take you on a really, really quick whistle-stop tour of those wrecks. It's going to feel a little bit light touch, I'm afraid. I'm happy to take questions afterwards. Present some of the key finds and then spend the rest of the paper discussing several recent steps we've taken to improve the accessibility of this really important maritime heritage. The image on the screen is a brass Haydn-style brooch from the wreck of the Dartmouth, 1690. It's one of the only shiny objects we have in the whole collection. I'm going to come back to it quite shortly. The first of the wrecks is one I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time talking about, not because it's not significant, but because it sits apart somewhat from the other 3 that are going to follow in terms of, well, first of all, geography, character of the assemblage, and the probable context in which it sank. It also falls in a different curatorial section to mine, so it's a slight outlier in that regard, but that shouldn't detract from the significance of the assemblage. The Kinloch wreck is the earliest of the 4 that we have, dating from around 1590 to the first quarter of the 17th century. Kinloch itself, the wreck's about several kilometres south of there, is located far north on the west coast of mainland Scotland. I've got a map on the next slide. It's about as far north as you can get before the coastline turns quite sharply east towards Dunnet Head and the Orkney Islands. It was discovered in 1997 by Roy Hemming and members of the RAF Lossiemouth Aqua Club, who then carried out additional searches in the immediate years following the discovery. People being joined by the Archaeological Diving Unit and the team at St Andrews, and then a HES-funded Historic Environment Scotland-funded excavation after that as well. It is published in the IJNA, and of the 191 finds recovered, the vast majority are ceramics, and of those ceramics is the largest assemblage of Italian maiolica ware recovered from an archaeological context in Scotland. And as you can see, it's quite spectacular. It's really beautiful material. It's been hypothesized very convincingly that the ship likely had quite strong Iberian Peninsula associations and was on its way north about Britain from the Iberian Peninsula, and that the maiolica from Italy may represent either a small cargo assignment or possibly the possession of a high-status individual on board the ship. So Kinloch is just at the top there in the kind of the muddy grey-brown pin at the top of the map. The other 3 are from the Sound of Mull, so further down the west coast. And I want to just mention very quickly, I've used the base map on the right here as a terrain map, so you get a sense, if you're not familiar with that part of the coastline, a real sense of just how important the sea routes are here for the transport of goods, people, ideas, communication. It also has quite important geopolitical significance as well. So people at home, you won't be able to see the marker. Neither can I. But at the bottom where you see the yellow point, which is the wreck of the Swan, if you move northeast from there up into Loch Linney, you can soon come to Fort William, which is an older fort, Cromwellian fort, and of course a Williamite fort in the late 1680s as well. So in terms of control of this particular part of the west coast, it's really, really important. So the first of the 3 wrecks, as we move further south, is the Mingree Castle wreck. It was wrecked 1640-ish, just off Mingree Castle. And it was discovered by Phil Richards in 1999, visited by the ADU, the Archaeological Diving Unit, and a programme of archaeological work followed, and the site was designated in 2000. We have a number of finds. It's quite a small assemblage, but it's quite an intriguing assemblage. So we've got an enormous kettle, a copper kettle on the top left there. It is currently in our low humidity metal store for good reason. A Bartman jug in the centre top, which is a staple of any 17th century wreck. Moving to the bottom left, we've got a roll of lead sheet. We also have smaller fragments of lead sheet with nail holes as well. And on the far bottom right, some small timbers, mostly undiagnostic. But the top right is a lead merchant weight. The 2 holes is where the iron handle once sat, is now missing. And the weight is stamped, and we have a date stamp on it, which has been interpreted as 1636. And based on that, and looking at archival evidence, it's been well speculated that the vessel may have been a Dutch ship lost in an attack on Mingri Castle during the Wars of the Three Kingdoms in 1644. This is detailed in an eyewitness account from a Covenanter prisoner at the castle at the time who watched the shipwreck, John Weir. The association is tentative, but entirely plausible, and with the absence of further evidence, I'm quite happy to go with this at the moment. I really hope there's more work to do on this wreck. We've had it in our possession for quite a long time. We've only just formalised with the receiver of wreck the transfer of title, so I'm very close to formally registering this material now. It's mostly done, but I'm hoping to keep working on it in the future. And then we come to two assemblages, two wrecks that we know an awful lot more about, actually. Two larger assemblages. The first is the Swan. It's a vessel lost in 1653 while besieging Duart Castle, seat of the Macleans on the Isle of Mull, as part of a Cromwellian response to a royalist revolt known as the Glencairn Uprising. It was discovered by John Dadd in 1979 and underwent excavation again by the St Andrews team in the 1990s. The site was designated in 1992. The excavation assemblage is much bigger, and it's also highly varied. So we've got at the top left there a clay pipe. We have a big archaeology collection. We have many, many, many clay pipes. They are almost all from terrestrial midden sites. They're all broken. These are quite ephemeral objects. I think it's been described as ephemeral in the past. They are quickly used. They're easily discarded. They're easily broken. They're kind of cheap, easily made. So this is one of only two complete pipes that we have in our entire collections. We have 12 million objects in our collections, to put that in context. Most of them are insects. But even so, it is a really rare survival to have a complete one. Just in from that, we have a group of coins from the Swan. I'm going to speak about those a bit later. There's about 100 coins there. We have a jar with surviving ointment. We're hoping at some point in the future to do some GM... I always forget the GCMS, grass chromatography mass spectrometry analysis, to understand the material analysis of what the ointment is. And the top right corner, we have a pocket watch from the Swan as well. This underwent some CT scannings quite a few years ago now, which revealed the internal mechanisms and the name of the watchmaker, Nicholas Higginson of London. Bottom left, we have 3 pewter tapetens. These are Scots liquid measures, quite specific Scots liquid measures. These are the earliest from an archaeological site in Scotland. Colin Martin's published on them quite extensively. And a series of timbers of carved woodwork, including royalist arms of the heir apparent. So we know at some point in its past this ship had a royalist history or a royalist association or allegiance. There is, although we know it sank as a Cromwellian ship, there's a suggestion that it appears to have been originally the ship of the Marquis of Argyll, Archibald Campbell. Archibald Campbell, during the Wars of the Three Kingdoms and the subsequent period, is a character whose political allegiances shift fairly considerably, and that's putting it mildly. He's the man who crowns Charles II in Scotland. He's also the man who's executed by Charles II upon the Restoration. And it appears at some point in the before 1653, the ship was given in service or sold into service of the state for use by Cromwell. All of this is detailed in a quite fantastic publication, I'm sure you're all aware of it, by Colin Martin, published by the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland, and it really details the very complex archaeological jigsaw puzzle to piece together this identification. It was misidentified for several years, and it's a really fantastic, wonderful read. And then we come to the Dartmouth. The Dartmouth, it's quite fitting to be here, was built in Portsmouth, launched in 1655, so 2 years after the Swan sank, and wrecked after a 35-year career, quite a varied naval career. Starts as a ship of the Cromwellian state, then in the Restoration Navy, and then as a ship in the Navy of William and Mary. Its career contained a bit of everything. It did a lot of coastal work in domestic waters. It was well built for that. It served across in Virginia during the Bacon Rebellion in the 1670s. It chased a pirate in Puerto Rico. It served in the Mediterranean. It also saw, on occasion, just twice, fleet action as well, quite precarious for the fifth rate. It wrecked in October 1690, just off the Isle of Mull on a rocky islet called Ilan Ruan Regera. The English translation is roughly Island of the Knight's Point. It was discovered in 1973 by Bristol's Huddersfield Bristol Undersea Archaeology Group and was subsequently excavated by the St Andrews team again in collaboration with the finders. The site was designated in 1974. It was revoked without consultation 5 years later and then redesignated in 1992. And we're fortunate with the Dartmouth that we have an enormous collection, and it's really, really broad. We have the bell on the top left here. It says DH 1678. 1678 is the date of a major refit for the Dartmouth. We've got a group of rigging components, including complete blocks, still with moving parts. We've got a whetstone in the top right there, which is made from Belgian coticule, the finest stone of the day for whetstones. This was actually disassociated from the assemblage for quite a few years, but Colin assures me he lifted it himself from the wreck site. So it is now reassociated with the material. We've got a large collection of structural timbers as well from the lower section of the hull, framing timbers, a knee joint, a big section of the keel, strakes, the full works. We've also got, just to the right of that, a Highland-style brooch. This is fantastic. We have a large collection of Highland-style brooches at the National Museum of Scotland. They kind of evolve in the early modern period out of the earlier late medieval annular brooches, but they get bigger and wider and flatter and are decorated with hunting scenes and animal motifs and interlace and foliage and knotwork and all those kinds of things. This example has on the back of it two engraved crosses, almost certainly intended as protective, amuletic, apotropaic symbols. So it's a really kind of tangible, personal insight into someone on the ship. We don't know whether it's loot. We don't know whether it is a gift given to one of the soldiers on the ship. The jury's out on that. And then we have two wonderful gold guineas. There's just one here on display. It's a gold guinea of James the 7th and 2nd. So London Mint, I think, for James II. And this is the reason the Dartmouth at sea in 1690. We're very fortunate that we have a wealth of archival evidence for the actions of the Dartmouth. We also have a sketch by William van der Velde the Younger from the mid-1670s, which shows probably the Dartmouth. We're not certain, but people more informed in naval architecture than I am are fairly convinced. It's missing the bell and the belfry, but if it is, it's the only sketch we have from Dartmouth. And on the right, we have this is some archival work that I was doing at the National Archives, a copy of the oath required of naval officers to take in service of William and Mary. And the ship is at sea on the west coast of Scotland in 1689 and 1690, intended to convince, and not particularly gently, the Highland Jacobite clan chiefs to swear their allegiance as well. So we've got four wonderful vessels, assemblages from vessels. We've got a particular regional focus in the Sound of Mull, and we've got an awful lot of material. So how are we improving access to this? Well, the first is quite prosaic and museological. It's about how we're storing this material and how we're conserving it. We're fortunate that most of this material has seen some conservation at some point, mostly the Dartmouth and the Swan. But the conservation goes hand in hand with the long-term storage, and collection storage is constantly evolving, but can always be improved. So I've got two quick case studies from the Dartmouth, which are good examples of this. One is relating to freeze-dried timbers, and the other is how we're storing metalwork. I mentioned that we've got a big section of the lower hull. It was lifted and then at our research laboratory, which was the forerunner to our conservation department, it was disarticulated. You can see on the left here, placed into wet tanks. And then over the years, topped up, made sure the concentration was correct. We did for some time have a freeze dryer on site. That got taken away. So we've lost now all capacity to freeze dry this kind of material internally. And then in 2023, we had slightly fortuitous site improvement works. So the building that these timbers were in was being knocked down and replaced with something a bit more airtight. You can see the image on the right is a little bit holy. So the timbers were lifted out of the tanks. You can see my conservation colleagues there. They were wrapped, they were palletized, they were taken down to York Archaeology. There we go. They were freeze-dried there. They were returned several months later in 2024. They were then restored on pallets, and they're now in a brand new building where they are individually accessible. And we're at the point now where we, my conservation colleagues in particular, have worked very hard on this. We're starting to re-identify, reconnect all the timbers using original site plans, using acetate drawings from the research lab when the timbers were disarticulated, but also with the enormous and very generous expertise of Colin and Paula Martin, who still visit the collection centre and work with us on this material. And I suspect it's work we simply wouldn't be able to do without them. So watch this space. We've also got a collection of cannonballs and grenades. The hand grenades in particular are like hen's teeth. Perhaps not for this audience, but from a broader archaeological context in Scotland, these are the earliest from an archaeological site in Scotland. We have 2 fragments of hand grenades from the Battle of Killiecrankie, which is the year before the Dartmouth sinks, but they're fairly undiagnostic and they're very, very small. The grenades we have are, some of them are complete. They still have the wooden plug intact. We've got some that are broken with a perfect cross section. So there's lots of research we can do in terms of storage, use, development of this early modern weapon. The issue with metalwork is that it quite easily degrades, and space in our low humidity metal stores is always at a premium. So our preventative conservation team have come in with a novel way to try and improve the relative humidity of this material. So on the left, we've got the old storage boxes, a bit ramshackle. On the right are the new sealed boxes, and they create a mini microclimate inside. So we have a layer of the grenades, a very thin bag of conditioned silica gel. If the weight's okay, we might put more material on top with more bags, of very thin bags of silica gel. They're then completely sealed. And on the top of the boxes, we have some data. So the number of bags in there, the weight of the silica gel, when it was prepared. And there's a tracker as well, a sensor that feeds back live data to an app on the phone. So we know already within a few weeks, these boxes are performing much, much better than our dedicated low humidity metal stores. The relative humidity is about 3 in these. So it's really, really good stuff. And we'll protect this material for the long term. We're also looking at research opportunities. All of these recs have been published to some degree. I've come in not as a maritime archaeologist, not as a diver, but with a background in finds as a finds specialist from terrestrial archaeology, particularly metal detected finds. So I've had to learn a little bit on the job with this. But I've tried to identify research opportunities that haven't been tackled either in the immediate post-excavation work or in publication. And there are 3 here. One, I'm just going to talk about one due to time today, which is the first one relating to the coins and textiles from the Swan. So you've seen this image. It's about 100 coins, give or take. We have many groups of coins from the Swan. We have tiny fragments of single coins. We have clumps of 10 or 15 coins, up to 100. And they've been published by Colin, some coins identified as well, but what we hadn't got really was a proper sense of the numismatic character of this assemblage, how the clumps related to each other, if at all, and what we might do going forward. So we brought in a PhD student on placement from the University of Glasgow, Cameron McLean, who was fantastic, and he looked at what he could identify. He figured out the earliest coin we had was a coin of Edward VI, so 100 years old at the time of the Swan sinking, which tells us about circulation and the value of particular denominations of silver over the longer term. But we also, and you can see this by eye, we have surviving textile on the coins as well. You see it's a bit better. There's a yellow, the yellow section there is the textile under low microscopy, and then when you go to higher microscopy on the right-hand side there, you get a real sense of the structure of the textile. working with a colleague who specialises in historic textiles at NMS, Helen Wild, we think we're looking at silk. And we think the textile across all of the groups of coins is the same. So they seem to be related and coming from the same context. We've also, under microscopy, it became clear that we were seeing what looked like coins that were minted in reverse. It's kind of a mirror image of coins. And when you look a little bit closer, actually, this is helping us reunite different groups of coins. So on the left here, you've got a coin, a sixpence of Charles I. You can see the six there of the obverse of the coin. And then just to the side of it, you've got the lettering of the reverse of the coin in reverse. And that's where the reverse was attached and since broken away. And we've started to match up coins from their impressions on different groups of coins. So we're now starting to build a 3D jigsaw puzzle of what this numismatic material actually is telling us and what it looks like. I think it's probably, rather than a pay packet, some money for supplies for the bosun, or I don't think we're seeing much in the way of individual purses or individual caches of money. I think this is something that is centralized on board the ship, and we're just starting to reunite everything together now. We're also looking digitally. This is not particularly high tech yet, but that's why I'm here this weekend. We're looking at developing a longer term digital strategy for this material. And we just re-released a page on the pocket watch from the Swan, which has been updated slightly. It's got lots of high-res images of the CT scanning, a video of the CT scanning as well. So if you haven't seen it, do have a look. As part of our digital outputs as well, we have started, thank you, we started modelling some of the material from the Swan wreck. This was done using a structured light scanner. We've got some of the coins, some of the ceramics. None of that's public at the moment, but if you'd like to see the model, I can give you the link. But not only the wreck material, also associated material in our collections that relates and can inform, and we can use to interpret some of the historical background to this material too. So at the top right there, you have a seal of Oliver Cromwell, Great Seal of Scotland from 1656, which hasn't come from the wreck, but is in our wider collections. We've also just purchased a handheld scanner as well, so we can do more of this work going forward. And finally, coming to interpretation, National Museum of Scotland has quite a complex institutional history. The archaeology side of things has its roots in 1780 with the collection of the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland. In 1985, National Museum of Scotland was born out of what came out of that, so the National Museum of Antiquities of Scotland, and also the Royal Museum of Scotland, which was more international in its outlook, so natural sciences, global arts and cultures, that kind of thing, came together in 1985 to create what we now have as National Museum of Scotland. And as part of that, kind of an outcome of that merger, it was the New Museum of Scotland in 1998, which is the history and archaeology of Scotland. But this was prior to the acquisition of Mingery Castle wreck, and it was prior to a kind of a fuller curatorial understanding of the Swan material, identification of the ship. So gallery narratives, if you go to the museum today for kind of early to mid 17th century Scotland, I've put lacking. They're entirely devoid of a maritime perspective. The Dartmouth has seen more opportunity for display. We've got a case in a permanent gallery relating to early Jacobitism in Scotland and Ireland. And it also saw a selection of material on long-term display in the Tower Museum in Derry, Londonderry, Northern Ireland. But we are thinking more broadly now, because the galleries are nearly 30 years old, there's lots we'd like to change, and we're thinking down the line, hypothetically, if we were to redo some of this work in the future, and kind of a blue sky thinking cap on what we would like to do, what new narratives, what new stories, and what new material we want to get on display. So we're looking at themes such as Scotland and its relationship with the sea. We don't really explore that past prehistory in the current galleries, and we've certainly never done a temporary exhibition on that kind of thing. I think there's room for the focus on the Sound of Mull and the west coast of Scotland in particular, as a seaway of geopolitical importance, and the changing relationship between coastal castles and the development of onboard artillery during that period as well. We can tell for the first time ever a narrative of Scotland's experience of from the Wars of the Three Kingdoms right through to early Jacobitism. And I think for this period, we have really well understood historical events. They're underpinned by a wealth of archival evidence. But I think it's really, really clear going forward, and some of Colin's work on the Swan is a fantastic example of this, that anything we do with this collection, the objects and the archaeology and the material culture have to drive the narrative rather than just illustrate it. So I think I'll leave it there. I've had a 5-minute warning. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. It was really interesting. Any questions? Yes.
On the topic of freeze-drying timbers, so for future reference collections and research, what effect does that have on the non-physiological, like samples, so caulking and like tar and things like that?
Oh, that's a great question. I've not seen any evidence of that on our timbers. It's probably a question for the conservator or a material scientist. So I won't be able to give you a much detailed answer on that. It's not a problem we came up against with the Dartmouth in particular. But it's a great question. It's something kind of a slight tangent to that, something we have had to think about in terms of material choice and how we store and conserve it is with the iron grenades. Because some of them are so complete, they have the wooden plugs inside, and wood is not so happy in an ultra low humidity environment. So actually some of the best complete examples, we've actually not stored in a low humidity in the sealed boxes because actually we want to preserve the wooden aspects. And we have lots of other grenades in the collection. Yeah.
Oh.
As a national repository, are you under any sort of obligation, legal obligation to accept material from Scottish archaeological sites, or can you pick and choose what you want? So you can have all the good stuff, but I don't want all the other stuff.
Do you mean within assemblages or? Oh, no. So in Scotland, we have the treasure trove system. So metal detected finds come through that, but also archaeological assemblages come through that same system. It's quite a formal system. You have to be an accredited museum to apply for that material, but there's no presumption that you have to take it. If material is offered out to accredited museums within a particular council area, so everything that's come up in Highland, any accredited museum in the Highland Council area can apply for that material if it fits within their collecting policy. Ours is broad, it's national. What happens if something doesn't get an application? We go to a second round and we might pick it up as a kind of a second round stage. But if we take an assemblage, we have to take the assemblage. We can't just pick and choose or cherry pick, which has a knock-on effect to storage capacity, but also it relies entirely on the decisions of the excavator as to what they feel merits inclusion in that assemblage before it's reported. Receiver of rec operates very, very differently. I've not had to acquire anything through receiver of rec other than Mingru, which we already had in the last 5 years. So
you're not a fallback if the local or other regional museums don't want it.
No, my bosses was
that material could still be noticed.
Yes, we try and work with, so excavators will work with community projects, especially if it's had a big community aspect to it. We might step back from something if we know it's going to go to a good home with a meaningful community output, for example. But we are also very happy to step in if we think it benefits our collections, fits within our collecting policy, and we can do something with the material.
Your open access to your digital models on Sketchpad. Are members of the public able to download the 3D data sets to 3D print their own?
Oh, I did this before my maternity leave, so that I can't remember, but I'll speak to a colleague, Hugo, who does all of the tinkering with this, and I'll ask the question, quite possibly.
Well, we're dead on time. So is it one more question? Last question?
I have a question regarding the freeze drying process on those timbers. I'm currently working on freeze drying some wooden artifacts from 1559 lunar shipwrecks in Florida. I'm just wondering, if you guys pre-treat those with egg in Scotland before setting them down? If you did, what would molecular weight get used in that process?
What was that last sentence?
So was the molecular weight egg you were using for that pre-treatment process?
Yes, we use PEG for pretty much all of them. We also had some small finds that weren't timbers that were submerged in various solutions. The PEG was recorded by a conservation department, so if you'd like, I can get that information for you. But yeah, it was submerged for quite a long time. It topped up periodically. The length of time doesn't seem to have particularly warped the timbers. We're not concerned about their stability or anything like that. But I can certainly put you in touch with someone who's been part of that very particular process, if you'd like.
Thank you.